In at number 10, we have the Crystal Wyvern, and there are many reasons why I think that this creature should make the list, and the first reason for it is because of just how easy these things are to tame, but also just how useful they are on top of that as well. They pretty much just have the same use as the Wyvern, and they even have the hydration buff, although maybe not all to the most useful, as you know, you kind of need to like get those wings in the water without you actually touching the water. That's not the most useful thing for these creatures to have, but they do have it, which is, it's nice to have, I guess. And with the tame method being a passive one, it becomes a lot easier than a normal Wyvern tame. And yes, you do need Primal Crystal, which you know you get by knocking out a Wyvern, Crystal Wyvern of course, and you need to be level 65. I still think it's a lot easier than the normal Wyvern tame, and they're just so useful for general early game flying travel. And you might think, well, level 65 really isn't an early game level. A very basic note run can get you there and even further pretty quickly within your first hour of Ark, unless if you're playing official, that's probably not going to work out for you quite as well. But quite a lot of people these days aren't really playing official, so you know, a lot of people actually watching this channel do play single player, so it would definitely work for that, as everything's 2.5 times if you haven't fiddled with all of these settings. Anyway, so yeah, that's why the Crystal Wyvern is on the list. Next up, we've got the Maywing, and this really is a really great travel mount for me. Don't know why I needed so many reallys in there for me, but you know, either way, this is like the fastest travel mount out there, and it really does act as a good one. Again, the really is returning. More reallys, please, I guess. Either way, essentially this uses the gliding technique rather than the just general flying technique, which can be a little bit of a disadvantage, but still I really think it does play a just general huge part in my Ark traveling, because gliders usually tend to have a faster speed, and the Maywing isn't all too bad on flatter terrain compared to a creature like the Rock Drake, which came earlier. It doesn't feel as ergonomic to control as the Maywing, and that might just be because I've spent less time with it, or it might just be that it actually can't really handle those flatter terrains quite as well. But also, the Maywing isn't just a gliding mount. This thing also really does pack a punch when it comes to breeding, as it acts as a portable feeding trough, and it can gather berries on top of that as well. The only slight downside is that animation is a little bit disturbing, but the fact you can get this thing saddled at level 19, it really is an absolute godsend to have this creature. Next up, we've got the Megalodon, and this may be a little bit of an unpopular opinion among many of you, but I actually really like this creature as an underwater tame. And yes, the Basilote is a really great one, and you could do that as well. And there actually is another creature which I use for underwater travel, which is much later on in the list, which I use over this thing. But actually, just for general, like, for doing the Moda and just for general underwater travel, I will use this creature. Like, most of the time, you could say. Maybe I'd use the other creature, which I'm not going to spoil what it is, but just, like, mainly, I would say mainly for combat underwater, or if I'm maybe like transporting some stuff and I need to actually kind of pack more of a punch down in the underwater depths, I will take a Megalodon with me, because I'm not going to take a Moda. They're just a bit too big and bulky for me, and although Basilote does work, it does have that depth limit, so no, not the friendliest, and a Megalodon really can fight back, apart from like electric eels and jellyfish, which it struggles with a little bit, but I still think, considering its size and its damage and the fact that it deals bleed, it's a really great creature to have. In number 7, we have got the RG, and this creature really is a huge one when it comes to me and just my general Ark day-to-day life, as this creature is so useful for just getting around the map and just getting things done, really. When you look at this creature and you look at how much metal it can transport because of that weight stat, and you look at how easy it is to tame, it really is a truly great one, which I can't not use at all in Ark. I have to use this creature. It's partly maybe some nostalgia reasons, because I've been using the RG for absolutely ages, but I really think this is like one of the best flyers in the game. It's a pretty good travel mount, although maybe not the quickest out there, and it really does pack a punch in the damage department, which you maybe wouldn't expect quite as much, because, you know, it's an RG. You wouldn't expect it to do that much damage. It can also carry creatures in its beak as well, which is kind of nice, but I don't really need to carry a Dodo around with me in its beak, so I don't really use that all too much. Its saddle also acts as a smithy, so if any of your metal stuff breaks along the way, you can always just repair that. If you have some metal ingots on you, it's not going to refine metal ingots like a Phoenix does. And also, when it kills something and then it eats that dead corpse, it will get a regen buff, which, you know, so it's a nice ability for it to have. Next up, we have got the Snow Owl, and in my opinion, this just has a slight edge over the RG in quite a lot of factors, and maybe almost everything apart from the metal gathering and travel and the fact that it's got the regen buff and the smithy as a saddle. But the Snow Owl has some more compelling features, you could say, which make this a better creature in my opinion, and one which I am more likely to go for. Obviously it's less accessible because it doesn't spawn on the island, but still I really do think this is a better creature for me and probably a lot of players out there. Namely, this creature is significantly faster than the RG, and it does have that gliding ability. You could kind of say it's more of a diving ability. It's something along those lines. It's not really like a glide that a glider would have because it is a flyer, but it really does tremendously speed up these creatures. But it also has kind of a heat vision ability, which, you know, is actually quite nice to have for me as a PvE player, because if I ever lose a creature for some reason, like, I can quite easily find it. It tends to be wild, not really tamed ones, because I use creature finding deluxe for that and I can just find them anyway. But still, in a pinch, just if you want to find a small wild creature around you, it's quite useful to have. You also want to crank that stamina, not just so they can fly long distances, but they can actually heal up dinos. They're essentially just a Daedon on steroids. You can't really use these things in like general standard boss fights because they don't allow flyers in, and obviously this thing's not allowed in. But for like just if you want to heal up Ark creatures, or if you want to heal up wild creatures, if you're taming something and then its health got really low because you just tranking it for ages and you just need to give it a break so you can continue tranking it, just heal it up with this creature and then you don't have to wait for ages, and then its torpor won't go down quite as much, and yeah, you're going to have a much more successful tame. And obviously if you feed the Snow Owl pellets to Gachas, you really are going to get some insane loot. I know that has been nerfed since release, but still you can get some quite OP stuff. So I really do recommend the Snow Owl if you've never had one already. Next up, in number 5, we've got the Shadowmane, and this creature is just here for its insanely great mobility and just general overall skill in boss scenarios, combat scenarios, travel scenarios, underwater scenarios, and just generally being a really great creature overall. Firstly, this thing does have really high mobility stats. Like it can zoom across the map and it can kind of jump really high. It's a little bit scary actually. You should always beware if you're on a flyer and there's a Shadowmane, because it can just jump up and just absolutely decimate you. But also these things do have the pack buff, they can go invisible, and they have the hydration buff too, which again barely any creatures have, and it makes a lot more sense for this creature than like the Crystal Wyvern, because they're a land creature, so you can actually go underwater with these things, and they are actually really great in that scenario. The only real downside to these creatures is the tame method is pretty annoying, and there are a lot of things that can go wrong with it. But once you do have one, you really do have yourself an insanely great mount, which I think all of you out there should be taming as long as you have a map where this thing actually spawns on, as it truly is a terrific creature. Next up, we have got the Desmodus, and in my opinion, this thing just kind of had to be here for several reasons. Like, this thing can make Sanguine Elixir, which is absolutely OP, and also on top of that as well, this creature is just really mobile, and it can also pick players off mounts as well, which is quite OP for any given PvP scenarios. And on top of that, it does have the gliding ability as well, which, you know, does play quite a big benefit to it. And although maybe its tame method can be a little bit annoying, this thing can farm blood bags as well. So once you've got one, the next one is going to be significantly easier than the next, but it kind of does go like that for quite a lot of tames out there. Once you have one, it makes it easier to do the next one, unless it's just a knockout tame, then it's pretty much the same each time, and then it just depends on what kind of resources you have at the time. But yeah, the Desmodus truly is a great creature, and considering it spawns on Fjorda, it's really accessible to pretty much all Ark players out there, apart from Switch and mobile players, although they do tend to make up a smaller minority of the general population of Ark players out there. This may be unpopular, but in number 3, I've got the Baryonyx, and why am I putting this thing above the Desmodus? Well, I think it's more of a useful creature to me, and although that 30% on tames is such a cool ability to have, the usefulness of this creature being such a great caving mount to me, and considering how useful doing caves is in Ark compared to like getting 30% taming on a creature, to me the Baryonyx just seems like the better option, which I'd go for. I know it isn't a flyer and all of that, and maybe it doesn't have as many abilities behind it, but it's so invaluable for all of its caving abilities, and with its one kind of ability which it does have, it makes it pretty useful for the underwater caves, as it can stun creatures up to the size of a Megalodon. You see that a little bit later in the B-roll, and considering it's got pretty good health, pretty decent damage, very good mobility, especially for a carnivore, but it does make sense considering its size. It's really good underwater as well. It's got actually some pretty decent speed on it, which again does make it a really great caving mount, as you do probably want quite a quick creature. What even? It's like I've got a dysfunction with saying R sounds, but yeah, that's why I put the Barry at number 3. Feel free to disagree with me. It's just my opinion really on this creature. I really like the Barry. At number 2, we have got the Bloodstalker, and in my opinion, this is the best ocean creature. And you might not think of it like that, but for me, this is the epitome of ocean travel. This creature absolutely soars under the water, and although in this bureau I've got absolutely nothing which shows this actually being underwater, I only skim over the top of it. I'll probably have to change that when these things come out in ASA, or I might just redo the B-roll for this creature at some point, because I really do use these things for underwater travel a lot. They can quickly get away from electric eels and jellyfish, which again makes them quite useful for that job, because they are absolute pests of the ocean and you're not going to have a good time if you encounter one of them. These creatures also just on the land as well really do have quite a lot of speed behind them, which really again does benefit them quite heavily. And also on top of that, if you're on Gen 1, you can get some hexagons out of these things by doing some missions with them. And I've actually done the alpha mission for the bog race. I know maybe not the biggest achievement, but you can definitely fly the Bloodstalker once you've done that. I'm a little bit rustier now just for general travelling around, because I mainly just use these things for underwater travel, and that's what I prefer them for, and that's kind of what I use these creatures for. But they are just packed with loads of other abilities as well, and you kind of turn into Spider-Man when riding this thing. And also their tame method is the exact same as the Desmodus. I should really say it the other way around, because obviously this creature came first, and thanks to the Desmodus actually being able to get loads of blood bags, it also does make Bloodstalker taming a lot easier. So I do actually really thank that creature for coming out and allowing Bloodstalker tames to be easier, because it really is a great creature. And finally, in at number 1 is the Deinonychus, and this really does just play such a huge role for me in just general amazingness of Ark creatures. It really is a great boss creature, and it's really just great for general ability and just generally kind of everything in Ark apart from resource gathering, although you know you have some other creatures that you can use the Anki and all of that, but I tend to not spend a lot of time talking about resource gatherers in Ark. I kind of just don't really appreciate them as much, and I probably should, but this thing can bleed damage to bosses, which is kind of an insane ability to have, which no other Ark creature has. And this thing, it really does bosses well. Like, you compare it to any other creature on the islands which can go into the bosses, and it does so much better than them, and it can kill them so quickly, especially because it has the pack buff, so you can just absolutely decimate tons of creatures. And again, that high mobility really is going to play a huge role when it comes to actually killing those bosses, and also just avoiding those bosses as well, because having a high mobility, you know, it's easy to get away from things, and you can kind of deal more damage just by hopping around it. You can it's not in most cases, but still there are some cases where that tends to work. It's mainly just for dodging stuff rather than dealing more damage, but also you can just see they're great for just general traversing of normal maps too, which again does play a huge benefit, and they can just be used as like normal travel mounts. And especially considering how easy they are to tame, they really are a no-brainer, and I think everyone should be taming themselves a Deinonychus. So thank you to my wonderful patrons Katerina Puchkova, Karina Thorne, Dominic Masijewski, and Ethan Tapia, who have all supported me through Patreon or through YouTube memberships. If you want to join this list, then go join Patreon or YouTube members, but thanks to all of these guys.